In this audio, Pastor Chris emphasizes the crucial role of spirituality in life, arguing that success hinges on spiritual understanding and engagement, not solely on intellect or material achievements. He highlights that salvation is just the beginning of a spiritual journey, requiring continuous growth and the utilization of spiritual gifts. Using biblical examples like the Exodus, he illustrates how spiritual laws govern human experiences, and neglecting this dimension leads to significant challenges. The sermon ultimately calls for active participation in spiritual practices for personal transformation and the fulfillment of one's potential. Let's listen to an excerpt.
Yes, life is spiritual. Life is spiritual. Human life is controlled from the realm of the spirit, whether or not you know it. It doesn't matter whether or not you know it. It's influenced and controlled from the realm of the spirit.
Let's now listen to two speakers as they discuss this sermon.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
It's a concept that has fascinated people across cultures and throughout history. This idea of unseen forces shaping our lives. What's really interesting here is how Pastor Chris links this to very real world stuff, like achieving success and overcoming obstacles.
Yeah, right off the bat, he puts forward this concept of spiritual laws, like whether we know it or not, our lives operate according to these principles. He even suggests that finding salvation is just the beginning, not the end point. That's a pretty big claim.
It definitely challenges a lot of conventional thinking, yeah. But what if there really are these sort of fundamental laws governing our existence, like spiritual physics, Wouldn't it be smart to try and understand how they work?
I'm with you so far. But then, why do so many people struggle? Even those who seem to have it all figured out, the successful doctor, the brilliant student in OCAN. Pastor Chris mentions a few examples like that. People who hit roadblocks despite their achievements. It makes you wonder, is intellect really not enough?
That's exactly his point. Relying solely on logic and intellect, it's like trying to navigate this vast wilderness with only half a map. You might make some progress, but you're bound to get lost without understanding the full terrain.
So how do we get the full map? Pastor Chris brings up a pretty epic example, the parting of the Red Sea. Even if you approach it metaphorically, it's a powerful image. What do you think he's getting at with that story?
I think he's highlighting the potential for incredible breakthroughs when we tap into these spiritual laws, Like imagine the Red Sea as a metaphor for those seemingly impossible challenges we face in life, those obstacles that just feel insurmountable in our careers, relationships, personal goals. He's saying that maybe a spiritual approach could be the key to that unexpected breakthrough.
Like those times when everything just seems to fall into place effortlessly, almost like magic. Could that be us unknowingly tapping into those laws?
It's definitely possible. And this brings us to another important point. Pastor Chris makes the potential consequences of living in spiritual ignorance. He doesn't shy away from it, suggesting that ignoring this whole dimension could be at the root of a lot of personal and even societal problems.
That's a pretty heavy statement. Can you elaborate on what he means by that? What kind of consequences are we talking about here?
He talks about feelings of emptiness, a lack of purpose, like even if you achieve success, there's still this underlying sense of unfulfillment. Imagine trying to build a house with no blueprints. You might end up with something that looks like a structure, but it wouldn't be stable, wouldn't last. In the same way, neglecting the spiritual dimension could lead to a life that feels, well, incomplete or lacking a solid foundation.
Okay, I see what you're saying. But are we saying that every problem in life can be solved just by becoming more spiritual?
Not exactly. It's more about incorporating that spiritual dimension into your decision-making, your approach to problems. It's like having access to resources and insights you might otherwise miss.
Yeah.
Like it's adding that crucial missing piece to the puzzle.
So less about finding a magical solution and more about gaining a new perspective, a new lens through which to see your challenges.
Exactly. And sometimes that shift in perspective, that's all it takes to unlock those solutions you hadn't even considered before.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together. From the limits of intellect to the potential for achieving those seemingly impossible things to, yeah, the potential consequences of ignoring this whole spiritual dimension. But Pastor Chris doesn't just leave us with a warning, does he?
You're right. There's this whole empowering aspect to his talk, too. He brings up this concept of impartation of spiritual gifts, suggesting that we each have these unique abilities, talents, almost like waiting to be activated. It's like we all have these hidden superpowers just waiting to be discovered.
Now, that's what I'm talking about. This is where it gets really interesting. So, what are these gifts and how do we, tap into them?
He doesn't give a specific list, but what he emphasizes is that they're often revealed through the process of spiritual growth. The more you nurture your spiritual connection, the more likely these gifts are to, well, blossom and bear fruit.
It's like those personality tests that reveal your strengths, right? Could these spiritual gifts be similar, like innate qualities that, once you understand them, can help you navigate life more effectively?
That's a great analogy. It's like he's saying we all have these unique spiritual strengths. And by understanding and utilizing those, that's how we can achieve greater fulfillment and, well, make a real impact.
So it's less about waiting for a lightning bolt of inspiration and more about actively cultivating your spiritual understanding, and then those gifts will naturally emerge.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your spiritual development.
And it makes a lot of sense. But where do we even start? Are we talking about specific rituals or practices?
That's a question we'll explore in more depth in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, the important thing to remember is that engaging with your spiritual journey, it's a very personal process. What works for one person might not resonate with another.
So it's about finding what feels authentic, what really speaks to your individual path.
Exactly. It's about trusting your own inner guidance.
Well, you've certainly given me a lot to think about. This whole concept of spiritual laws and gifts, it's definitely fascinating, but also a little daunting.
It's a vast and complex topic. But as you explore it, you'll find that the journey itself is just as rewarding as the destination.
I'm looking forward to diving deeper in the next part. Until then, keep those notes from Pastor Chris close, and let's see what other insights we can uncover together. Okay, so we're back and ready to really unpack these spiritual laws that Pastor Chris keeps talking about. From your notes, it seems you're especially curious about the practical side of all this. Okay, we get that they exist, but how do we actually use them? Tap into them in a way that helps us in our own lives.
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Pastor Chris seems to be saying that it's not enough to just kind of passively accept that these laws exist. He really emphasizes actively seeking to understand them and aligning our lives with them. It's like, learning the rules of a game. If you don't know the rules, how can you expect to win?
Yeah, that makes sense. But this feels a lot more mysterious than a game with clearly defined rules. Where do we even begin to uncover these spiritual laws? Do we need to go on some kind of mountaintop retreat?
Not necessarily. Pastor Chris highlights consistent spiritual growth and deepening our understanding of our chosen faith. He talks about seeking guidance, finding mentors, maybe even going deeper into the teachings, whatever your spiritual path might be.
So for those of us who aren't theologians or anything, what would seeking guidance actually look like? Are there any practical steps we could take?
It could be as simple as having conversations with people who resonate with you spiritually, or exploring different spiritual texts, even just taking time for quiet reflection. The point is to cultivate a greater awareness of the spiritual dimension in our lives. And as we do that, Pastor Chris suggests, these laws will begin to reveal themselves more naturally.
I like that it's not about following a rigid set of rules, but more of an invitation to explore, see what feels right for you personally. What about that idea of salvation that Pastor Chris keeps coming back to? Does this whole aligning with spiritual laws thing only apply if you're Christian?
That's a really interesting point. It makes me think about the bigger picture, like this universal yearning for connection to something bigger than ourselves. While Pastor Chris is speaking from a Christian perspective, his core message kind of resonates across different cultures and spiritual traditions. Think about concepts like karma or destiny, even the Tao. They all speak to this underlying idea of a greater force at play, this web of cause and effect that goes beyond what we can immediately see.
So it's not about following one specific dogma, but more about tapping into that human desire for meaning and purpose, regardless of what you believe.
Exactly. And Pastor Chris is suggesting that by aligning ourselves with these spiritual laws, whatever we might call them, that's how we unlock a deeper sense of purpose and ultimately lead a more fulfilling life.
Okay, so let's say we're on board, ready to dive deeper into all this. Are there specific things Pastor Chris recommends for actually aligning ourselves with these laws?
He doesn't lay out a step-by-step guide or anything, but he does point to some key practices. Prayer and meditation, for example, are tools for connecting with the divine and cultivating inner peace. He also talks about the importance of spending time in nature, being mindful of our actions and intentions, acting with compassion and kindness.
Those are all great practices, even outside a religious context. I'm starting to see how this can be relevant to, well, everyone, regardless of their beliefs. But what about those spiritual gifts he talked about? Are we all just walking around with these untapped superpowers completely unaware? How do we even know what ours are?
That's part of the excitement. Discovering your unique gifts is a journey in itself. Pastor Chris suggests that they often become more apparent as you actively engage in your spiritual growth. It's not about trying to force them to appear, but more about creating the conditions for them to naturally unfold.
Like, if you're cultivating a garden, you prepare the soil, you plant the seeds, and then you trust the natural process of growth.
That's a beautiful way to put it. As you nurture that spiritual connection, you'll start to notice patterns, inclinations that might point towards your unique gifts. Maybe you're naturally drawn to helping others, or you have a knack for creative expression. Those could be clues.
This is starting to make a lot more sense. But I have to admit, I'm still kind of grappling with the idea that aligning ourselves with these spiritual laws can lead to such, well, dramatic outcomes. Is there a risk of becoming overly passive? Like just expecting things to fall into place without actually putting in the effort?
That's a valid concern. It's all about balance. Pastor Chris isn't advocating for a purely passive approach. It's not about just sitting back and waiting for a miracle. It's more about creating a partnership, like aligning your efforts with the guidance and support of the spiritual dimension.
So it's not about giving up your own personal responsibility, but recognizing that you don't have to do everything on your own.
Exactly. It's about aligning yourself with a force that's bigger than yourself and recognizing that there's wisdom and support available if you're open to receiving it.
This is starting to feel a lot less daunting and more empowering, actually. It's like we're being invited to join this larger dance, like a cosmic collaboration of sorts. But what about those potential pitfalls? Pastor Chris also talked about the consequences of spiritual ignorance. What did he have to say about that?
He suggests that ignoring the spiritual dimension can leave you feeling, well, lost, unfulfilled, disconnected from your true purpose. It's like navigating a complex maze without a map. You might wander aimlessly, never finding your way out.
Are we saying that all problems in life come from a lack of spiritual awareness? That seems a bit simplistic, doesn't it?
Pastor Chris isn't presenting this as a black and white issue. He's not saying that all problems can be traced back to spiritual neglect. But he does suggest that bringing in a spiritual perspective, it can offer a valuable framework for understanding and navigating life's challenges.
So it's not about blaming every problem on a spiritual cause, but recognizing that there might be a spiritual dimension to our experiences that we're missing.
Precisely. And by simply acknowledging this dimension, we open ourselves up to a whole range of new solutions and possibilities.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. We've gone from this big idea of spiritual laws to the possibility of discovering your unique gifts to, yeah, the risks of neglecting your spiritual side altogether. It's a lot to process.
It is. And it's important to remember that this is a lifelong journey. There's no need to rush or try to figure it all out overnight.
So where do we go from here? We've talked about the what and the why of engaging with the spiritual dimension, but how do we actually do it? Like, put these ideas into practice in a way that makes a real difference in our lives.
That's the perfect question, and a great segue into the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore some specific practices and techniques for, well, cultivating your spiritual awareness and aligning yourself with these powerful spiritual laws.
Can't wait to get into that. Until then, keep those spiritual gears turning. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this whole spiritual dimension thing. We've talked about those spiritual laws, the what-ifs of ignoring them, but you seem really interested in, like, the practical stuff. You know, how to actually live this out and experience those benefits Pastor Chris keeps talking about.
It makes sense, right? We've covered the what and the why, and now we're at the how. Pastor Chris doesn't give us like a one-size-fits-all solution, but he's really big on actually taking action. Experiment with different practices, see what clicks for you.
So it's more about exploring, being open to trying things out, and less about following a strict set of rules.
Exactly. Remember that toolbox analogy? We've got all these spiritual tools at our disposal, each one with its own unique purpose and benefits. It's all about finding the ones that work for you, right here, right now.
Okay, I'm ready to open up that toolbox. What kind of tools are we talking about? We've mentioned prayer and meditation, but what else is there?
Oh, there's a lot. Spending time in nature is a big one, like really connecting with something larger than yourself. A walk in the woods, gardening, Even just sitting by a lake, immersing yourself in the natural world, it can help you tap into this sense of peace and interconnectedness.
I get that. There's something about being in nature that's so calming, so grounding. What about journaling? Would that be considered a spiritual practice too?
Absolutely. Journaling can be a powerful tool, yeah? For self reflection, working through your emotions, gaining clarity. It can even help you connect with your intuition, uncover those deeper desires that are kind of guiding you along your spiritual path.
So it's about creating a space for that inner dialogue, that self discovery.
Exactly. And that can be huge for your spiritual growth. Another thing Pastor Chris talks about is gratitude. Just taking a few minutes each day to appreciate the good things in your life, no matter how small. It can totally shift your perspective, help you cultivate a more positive and abundant mindset.
I can see that. When you're focused on what you're grateful for, it's harder to get bogged down in the negative. It's like you're training your brain to see the good.
Exactly. That's a powerful shift. Pastor Chris also talks about acts of service, extending kindness and compassion to others, volunteering your time, offering a helping hand, even just listening to someone. It creates this ripple effect of positivity and helps you connect with that shared humanity.
Eh? This is all starting to feel very doable, not these big, grand gestures, but small, meaningful practices that you can actually fit into your everyday life. But what about those spiritual gifts? How do we even know what ours are and how do we develop them?
Well, that's a journey of self discovery, and it unfolds as you go deeper into your spiritual practice. Pay attention to what brings you joy. What activities energize you, make you feel fulfilled? What comes naturally to you? What do people seek you out for advice on?
So it's about noticing those patterns, recognizing your strengths, trusting that inner voice that's guiding you towards your passion, your purpose.
Exactly. And remember, these gifts aren't meant to be kept hidden. They're meant to be shared, used to serve others, and make a real difference in the world.
This is incredibly inspiring. It's like we're all being called to step into our full potential, not just for ourselves, but for the betterment of all humanity.
That's the ultimate goal, right? Recognizing that interconnectedness,
Mhm.
tapping into that wellspring of loving compassion that's within each of us, and using it to create a more just, kind, harmonious world.
What a beautiful vision. And it all starts with taking that first step, embracing that spirit of exploration, committing to your own unique spiritual growth.
You're already on that path, exploring these ideas, seeking guidance, engaging in these conversations. Trust your intuition, keep asking those questions, and let that wisdom of the spiritual dimension be your guide.
What a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the spiritual dimension. We hope you're leaving feeling inspired to embrace your own journey and discover all the amazing possibilities that are waiting for you. Until next time, happy diving.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion and found it thought provoking. There are 10 quiz questions for you to answer in the video description, if you wish. And to watch the original video and find the answers to the quiz, follow the link on the end screen shown on this video. God bless.